The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song over Terminal C, a steady drone-like machinery inside a steel vault. Katie Rodriguez folded the last compression bandage with methodical precision, her fingers creasing each edge at perfect right angles, stacking them in the supply cart beside the blood pressure cuff and the portable defibrillator. Her hands never wavered. Had never wavered. Not in Bagram when the generator failed during a compound breach. Not now, standing in an airport medical station while passengers rushed past the glass partition dragging luggage and checking phones. She checked her watch, 5:38 p.m. 13 minutes. The Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport sprawled across 5,200 acres, and she occupied a corner of Terminal C's medical station, a room smaller than most people's bathrooms. One examination table. One supply cabinet locked with a key that hung around her neck. One window facing the concourse where crowds flowed like blood through arteries, endless and indifferent. Derek Pierce controlled everything else. The jacket lay draped over her chair, navy blue polyester with the airport authority logo on the chest. She adjusted it slightly, enough to feel the weight of what was sewn inside the lining. The patch. Faded now, the colors dulled to ghosts of their original vibrance. Bagram Combat Hospital. The lettering still legible if you looked close enough, if you knew what you were looking for. Her hands bore faint burn scars across the knuckles, thin white lines that caught the light when she moved. She'd gotten those holding and 4-line steady while mortars landed 200 meters out. Nobody asked about scars at an airport medical station. Derek Pierce entered at 5:51 p.m. She heard his shoes first, Italian leather, expensive, the kind that clicked against linoleum like he owned every floor he walked on. He wore the airport medical operations manager polo shirt pressed sharp as a knife, the creases in his sleeves geometric and hostile. His smile had the texture of a shark's approach, calculated and empty. He circled her workspace the way a predator circles weakened prey. His eyes tracked her hands folding the final stack of 4x4 gauze pads. He didn't speak immediately. That was intentional. Silence was a weapon he wielded like someone who'd learned its power young. Rodriguez, he said finally, drawing out each syllable as though her name tasted bitter. We need to discuss your performance metrics. Katie met his eyes with a flat, cold stare. The kind of stare that didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't carry apology or fear. Her composure was a thing made of steel. She said nothing. He mistook the silence for weakness. That was his first mistake. I've been reviewing your shifts, Pierce continued, stepping closer to the examination table. 3 months you've been here. 3 months, and I've noticed some inconsistencies. He opened his clipboard with the sound of paper snapping. Patient handling. Scope of practice. Whether you actually possess the credentials you claim to possess. Still nothing from Katie. She turned back to the supply cart and began arranging sterile gloves in the open shelf, her movements precise, unhurried. The silence in the room developed weight. I spoke with the TSA supervisor yesterday, Pierce said. The words came out smooth, practiced. Mentioned that your licensing might warrant a secondary verification. You'd be surprised how often contractors slip through the system with forged documentation. It happens more than you'd think. There it was. The opening move. The first real poison dripped into the water. Katie's jaw tightened. Just barely. Enough that someone watching her closely would see the muscle flex beneath her skin. She didn't turn around. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply continued organizing the gloves into their designated box, each pair aligned with the others like soldiers in formation. Pierce watched her for several seconds, waiting for a response that didn't come. He'd clearly expected defensiveness, tears, maybe an angry denial. What he got was the sound of latex sliding against latex, and the steady breathing of someone whose composure had been forged in places where emotions were the luxury of people who'd already survived. The paramedics, too, he continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge now, irritated by her non-reaction. I had a conversation with their dispatch coordinator. We discussed the protocol for emergency calls from contractor staff. Turns out there's been some confusion about whether airport medical contractors should be included in the standard notification chain. We're working to clarify that. He paused. Wouldn't want anyone stepping outside their lane and causing problems. That was the second poison. Isolation. If the paramedics didn't call her for emergencies, she was a figurehead. Decoration. A liability. He was building a case, brick by brick, and she was watching him do it without moving. I expect professional conduct from everyone in this facility, Pierce said, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a sermon to the already convinced. That means knowing your place in the hierarchy. That means understanding that airport medical operations aren't the same as whatever civilian setup you came from. Standards are different here. Expectations are higher. Katie finally turned to face him. Her eyes were the color of winter stone, gray and impenetrable. She looked at him the way a Marine looks at a target, assessed, catalogued, filed away. She didn't speak. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Pierce's smile tightened slightly at the edges. He wasn't accustomed to being ignored. That's all, he said, though it clearly wasn't. It was never all with men like him. It was prologue. I'll be monitoring your performance closely. He left the station at 6:03 p.m., his shoes clicking back down the concourse toward his office. Katie stood motionless in the center of the room, listening to the distant sound of an announcement over the airport intercom. Flight for 47 from Washington, D.C., arriving on schedule. She reached for her jacket. The patch was there, waiting where it had always been, sewn into the lining with thread that had outlasted 3 deployments and 5 years of civilian wearing. Bagram Combat Hospital. The insignia of the place where she'd earned the call sign Reaper 6. The place where she'd held pressure on 17 critical wounds in a single shift, where she'd extracted wounded Marines from a burning corridor with small arms fire hammering the walls around her, where she'd learned that composure wasn't the absence of fear, it was the ability to function perfectly while terror screamed beneath the surface. She thought of her son, Marcus. Captain, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Dark Horse Company. He'd called 2 days ago from Camp Lezan, his voice crackling through the phone with the particular exhaustion of someone running combat drills in 95-degree heat. Mom, when are you coming to visit? She'd promised him soon. After the assignment concluded. After she confirmed what the Pentagon needed confirmed about his commanding officer. General James Whitmore. 3 decades of service. 2 tours in Helmand Province. A reputation for operational precision and the kind of loyalty that made him either a saint or a liability, depending on which generals in the Pentagon you asked. They wanted her close. Wanted her watching. Wanted someone with experience and discretion embedded where Whitmore would inevitably be vulnerable, airports, medical moments, the places where armor came off and someone could take a pulse and determine whether the man was still the same officer who'd left for his morning briefing. She pulled her jacket on, feeling the weight of the patch settle against her ribs. The fluorescent lights continued their mechanical hum. The concourse beyond the glass partition continued its endless flow of passengers and luggage and the beautiful, terrible ordinariness of civilian life. But the room around her had changed. Derek Pierce had opened a door with his poison and his isolations and his implications. He'd marked her as a problem to be solved. He didn't understand that he'd marked himself as well, that he'd positioned himself for the collision that was coming. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what he didn't know. What he couldn't possibly know, standing in his pressed polo shirt with his calculated smile and his network of favors stretching through airport administration and city council offices and probably the Georgia Nursing Board itself. Katie Rodriguez wasn't desperate. She wasn't a contractor clinging to a job. She wasn't someone who could be isolated or discredited or driven out of an airport medical station through bureaucratic poison. She was Reaper 6. She was the woman who'd held a general's life together with her hands and her knowledge and the kind of calm that only comes from having already survived the worst the world could offer. She was here for a reason that transcended his comprehension entirely. And in approximately 12 minutes, General James Whitmore would walk through that airport terminal. His flight was on schedule. His cardiac event was not in the files. No one knew it was coming. No one except the Pentagon. No one except Katie, who'd been sent here to watch him, to wait for exactly this moment, to be the one who would stand between him and death when Derek Pierce believed he'd already removed her from the equation entirely. The clock on the wall read 6:11 p.m. For minutes until arrival. She checked the defibrillator's battery. Fully charged. She reviewed the medication cart in her mind. Epinephrine in the top drawer. Nitroglycerine in the left pocket of her work vest. Oxygen already running, tubing coiled and ready beside the exam table. She'd saved 37 lives in theater. She'd held a soldier's intestines together with one hand while performing manual airway management with the other. She'd moved through burning corridors with the precision of someone for whom fear was just another vital sign to monitor and control. Derek Pierce had no idea who he was standing next to. The fluorescent lights above Gate C12 cast everything in surgical white as Derek Pierce's voice carved through the terminal like a scalpel. His words weren't loud, that was the dangerous part. They were precise, measured, designed to cut deeper with each syllable. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his tone honeyed with professional concern as he addressed the family gathered around the 8-year-old boy she'd just stabilized. "You overstepped your civilian authority today." Katie stood 3 feet away, still holding the glucose gel tube. The boy, Marcus, they'd called him, had been hyperventilating 5 minutes ago, his blood sugar bottoming out at 47, his mother screaming that he was seizing. Katie had moved the moment she saw it, administered the gel sublingually, talked the child through 4-count breathing, kept her hand steady on his small shoulders while his father fumbled for his glucometer. Now the boy was stable. Color returning. Breathing normal. Sinus rhythm. Pierce smiled at the parents. Airport medical contractors handle basic first aid, not advanced interventions. You could have caused an international incident if this family decided to sue. We have protocols to protect passengers from unqualified personnel. The father started to object. Sir, please understand. Pierce's interruption was surgical. Smooth. These protocols exist for liability reasons. Katie's jaw tightened. Just barely. Just enough that someone trained to read restraint would know she was reading him like a medical chart, every lie, every calculation, every brick in the wall he was building around her. She didn't flinch. Didn't speak. Just waited while he turned those pale eyes toward her like a spotlight. "Bag lady," he said, the nickname falling from his mouth as if he'd just invented it, as if it were clever. A reference to her supply bags, the medical equipment she carried station to station. Needs to remember her place. The mother's face flushed. The father's shoulders tensed. The boy looked confused, sensing the shift in the adults around him like a pressure change before a storm. Katie met Pierce's eyes with a flat, cold stare. Not angry. Not hurt. Not defensive. Just empty. The kind of empty that belonged to someone who had watched people die in desert heat and learned that pride was a luxury only the living could afford. She held that stare for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough for Pierce to realize he'd miscalculated something fundamental about her. Then she spoke. 7 words. Delivered like a bullet finding its mark. Your mother would be ashamed you use her maiden name on your license. The blood drained from Pierce's face in real time. His mouth opened. Closed. His hand rose slightly, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. Katie turned on her heel and walked away, her badge clinking against her hip with each step. Behind her, the terminal seemed to hold its breath. The boy's mother was staring at Pierce. The father's expression had shifted from confused to something that looked like recognition, the understanding that he'd just watched someone dismantle a bully without raising her voice. What the family didn't know was that Katie had spent 3 months watching Derek Pierce. His patterns. His leverage points. His mother's maiden name, Ashford, printed on his medical license renewal that he'd carelessly left open on the office printer 3 weeks ago. The small vulnerabilities that came from living a lie of superiority, from assuming no one was paying attention, from forgetting that the quietest person in the room was usually the one gathering intelligence. She didn't slow her pace. Didn't look back. Her fingers found the patch inside her jacket lining as she walked, the faded Bagram insignia that marked her as something other than just a nurse. The fabric was soft from years of carrying it, from running her thumb across it during night shifts that had taught her to survive things Derek Pierce couldn't imagine. The break room at 6:04 p.m. smelled like burnt coffee and microwaved pasta. 3 paramedics and an EMT were eating lunch near the window. Katie pushed through the door, and they saw her. The silence that followed wasn't absence of sound, it was presence of something worse. Deliberate. Coordinated. One by one, they stood. Gathered their food. Left. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody said a word. They just dispersed, like a flock recognizing a predator. Pierce had been working the phones, working the hallways, poisoning the well with surgical precision. He'd told them something. Maybe that she was dangerous. Maybe that she'd forged her credentials. Maybe just that she was marked, and anyone who defended her would be marked too. Katie sat down at the table they'd abandoned and opened the protein bar she'd brought from home. The wrapper crinkled in the silence. She chewed without tasting it, her mind already calculating the next move, the next counter-move, the next way this man would try to isolate her. This was stage 2 of his campaign. Social attacks had progressed to strategic isolation. He was building a coalition. Weaponizing proximity. It was almost exactly like the pre-op briefings before compound operations. At 6:07 p.m., Pierce posted the written warning on the bulletin board near the security checkpoint. Katie saw it when she returned to her station, a formal memo with her name spelled out in Times New Roman, centered, official-looking. Unauthorized medical intervention. Final warning before termination review. He'd positioned it where passengers could see it. Where her credibility could be assessed by people who didn't know that she'd stabilized a diabetic child in 4 minutes with nothing but glucose gel and a voice steady enough to calm a frightened mother. 2 gate agents read the memo as they passed. Katie watched them whisper. Glance at her. Turn away. Pierce walked past her station at 6:09 p.m. He was smiling. The smile of a man who believed he was winning, who believed the isolation protocol was working, who believed that a contractor with no institutional protection would simply fold under the weight of manufactured doubt. Careful, bag lady, he said softly. Just for her. One more mistake and you're done. Katie didn't respond. She was already opening her laptop, already pulling up the file she'd been monitoring for 3 months. The Pentagon Security Review. General James Whitmore. The reason she was really here, the reason her son Marcus's commanding officer was landing in less than 20 minutes, the reason her hand moved to the patch inside her jacket pocket and pressed it flat against her ribs like a heartbeat. Whitmore had requested early retirement 6 weeks ago. No public announcement. No media. Just a flag in a DIA database that had caught the eye of someone who knew how to read the absence of information as clearly as the presence of it. Unusual financial transfers. Encrypted communications with an embassy contact. The kind of pattern that suggested compromise. And Katie had been here the whole time, watching. Waiting. Letting Derek Pierce believe she was just another contractor he could grind beneath the heel of his institutional authority, while she gathered intelligence on a 3-star Marine general and determined whether her son's mentor had sold himself to someone. The airport intercom crackled at 6:15 p.m. The voice was mechanical, filtered through aging speakers. Flight for 47 from Washington Reagan is now arriving at Gate C9. Flight for 47 from Washington Reagan is now arriving at Gate C9. Katie's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, her son, a Marine lieutenant at Camp Lejeune. General W says hello. Told him you work at ATL. Small world. Her chest tightened. Marcus didn't know her real assignment. Whitmore was more than a file on her laptop. He was the man who'd kept her son alive through officer training. The man who'd recommended him for advanced reconnaissance. The man who'd become, somehow, a mentor and a mission all at once. She watched the gate from her station as passengers began flowing through. Whitmore was easy to spot, dress uniform, silver eagles at his shoulders, the kind of bearing that came from command authority and years carrying the weight of decisions that shaped careers and ended lives. He moved through the crowd with purpose, heading toward baggage claim. Katie's training kicked in before her emotional response could follow. She watched his gait, his breathing, the angle of his head. Subtle markers. Something was wrong. Whitmore's pace slowed at gate C9. He reached for a seat back with his left hand. His right hand went to his chest. His face was sweating, that particular kind of sweat that came from internal pressure, from systems failing in real time. He was 40 feet from Katie's station, and she was already moving, her muscle memory taking over, her body recognizing the emergency before her conscious mind had finished processing it. The general sat down hard. Then he collapsed. Katie reached him in seconds, dropping to her knees beside the chair. Cardiac arrest. Unresponsive. She checked for a pulse, nothing. The crowd around them began to scatter, beginning that particular panic that came from watching someone die in public. She started compressions. Katie's station at Terminal C smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion, the particular combination that came from 8 hours of fluorescent light and recycled air. She sat at her desk, laptop open to a file marked with a red classified header, when the wall clock clicked over to 6:03 p.m. 37 minutes. That's all she had left before the 6:15 flight from Washington touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson, and General James Whitmore walked into her life the way she'd been trained to expect him, unsuspecting that his personal security detail had just been replaced by a decorated combat nurse with a faded Bagram patch sewn inside her jacket lining. The file on her screen contained 11 pages of personnel history, medical notes, and the reason she'd spent 3 months folding herself into the role of a contractor. General Whitmore was being fast-tracked for early retirement under circumstances flagged as mysterious by the Department of Defense. The Pentagon wanted to know if his request was voluntary or coerced. They wanted to know if someone was getting to him. They wanted Katie Rodriguez, Captain, United States Marine Corps Reserve, embedded in airport medical, to watch him. To listen. To determine if the general was a security risk or a broken man seeking an exit that nobody in his chain of command would approve. She'd signed the NDA at the DIA office in Arlington with Derek Pierce nowhere near her mind. 3 months ago, he wasn't supposed to matter. But Pierce had a gift for making himself matter. Katie closed the classified file and checked the arrivals monitor. Flight for 27 from Reagan National was on approach. 20 minutes out. Her hand steadied her breathing the way they always did, military muscle memory that Pierce could never understand, because he'd never been anywhere that required it. She stood, checked her badge, and moved to the treatment area of her station. Everything positioned for rapid response. Equipment arranged for speed. This was what she'd been doing her entire adult life, and Derek Pierce's 3-month campaign of isolation hadn't changed her hand's muscle memory 1 degree. The next words out of the arrival monitor speaker changed everything. Flight for 27 was cleared for landing at 6:14 p.m. Early. Katie heard the announcement and felt the particular quality of focus that had gotten her through Bagram settle across her shoulders like a second skin. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. This was why she'd absorbed 3 months of his bag lady condescension, his poisoning of her relationships with the paramedics, his calculated decision to tell the TSA supervisor that her nursing credentials had been falsified. All of it, every insult, every humiliation, every strategic removal of her professional credibility, had been preamble to this single moment, General James Whitmore, stepping out of a secure corridor with no idea that a captain-ranked combat surgical nurse was about to change his trajectory forever. The terminal began its shift toward the evening crowd, families rotating out, business travelers rotating in, the particular exhaustion of people who'd been in airports too long. Katie stood at her station and waited. Watched the corridor that led from customs processing. Her phone lay on the desk in case she needed to contact Cedar Creek Medical or call emergency services. Her medical kit was staged. Her hands were empty but ready. General Whitmore emerged at 6:16 p.m., 3 minutes ahead of schedule, moving with the careful precision of a man who'd spent 42 years in hierarchical systems. He wore a suit the color of granite. His face was the kind of weather that came from command decisions nobody outside the Pentagon would ever understand. He was walking toward the terminal's main exit corridor, past the security checkpoint, moving into the section of the terminal where Katie's station provided the only medical coverage for 9 gates and approximately 2,000 travelers on any given hour. He walked 30 feet from her station when his step faltered. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of collapse that announced itself with warning. One moment he was moving like someone who understood the architecture of power. The next moment his right hand flew to his chest. His left leg buckled. The briefcase he carried dropped to the tile floor with a sound like a closing door, definitive and final. Katie was already moving. She crossed the distance in 4 seconds, her body responding before her mind could catalogue the sequence of events. 3 other people saw what was happening. A businessman in a blue tie. A woman with a rolling suitcase. A teenager scrolling through his phone. They froze the way civilians always froze when they watched death arrive in public spaces. Katie didn't freeze. She went to her knees beside the general, her hands already moving to check his pupils, his airway, the pulse in his neck that was fluttering like something trapped in a cage. "Call 911, she said to nobody and everybody. "I need my medical kit. Now." The businessman in the blue tie understood urgency. He ran toward her station. Katie checked the general's breathing, shallow, rapid, wrong. His chest wall rose asymmetrically. The left side was moving. The right side was barely moving. She pressed her hands against his ribs and felt what she'd felt 17 times in Bagram and twice since arriving at Hartsfield-Jackson, the particular absence of air movement that meant a lung had collapsed inside the chest cavity. Pneumothorax. His cardiac event had triggered it, or the cardiac event was the result of internal pressure that had been building for hours. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that with every breath he took, air was entering the space around his right lung instead of the lung itself, and pressure was building. Tension pneumothorax. In approximately 4 to 5 minutes, that pressure would collapse the right side of his heart. His blood pressure would bottom out. He would die on the tile floor of an airport terminal while 300 travelers watched from a distance. Muscle memory took over. The businessman returned with her medical kit, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. Katie's hands didn't shake. She pulled out the 14-gauge angiocath needle, the kind designed for emergency decompression. Located the landmarks on his chest, second intercostal space, midclavicular line, the precise geography that separated life from death by approximately 1/4 inch. Her fingers found the space between his ribs with the kind of certainty that came from having done it in the dark, in the rain, with rounds coming from 3 different directions. That was when Derek Pierce arrived at a sprint. He was moving faster than he'd moved in 3 months. His face had gone the particular color of someone experiencing absolute professional catastrophe. 2 airport police officers followed him, their expressions confused because they hadn't yet understood what was happening. Pierce had understood immediately. He'd seen Katie on her knees beside one of the most senior flag officers in the United States military, and his entire 3-month strategy of professional demolition suddenly felt inadequate to the moment. "Stop," he shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" Katie positioned the needle. She didn't answer him. She didn't look at him. She performed the decompression with the kind of focus that made everything else in the terminal disappear into background noise. The needle went in. The hiss of air escaping sounded like relief. "You're assaulting a passenger," Pierce said. His voice had gone high. "Officers, restrain her." Katie's shoulder felt Pierce's hand close around it. Pressure. Grip. The physical manifestation of a man trying to stop something he didn't understand. She shrugged him off without breaking rhythm. Continued compressions. Check the general's chest wall. Symmetry improving. The right side rising now, matching the left. "He has a collapsed lung," Katie said. Her voice sounded like something that had learned to speak in places Pierce had never been. "I'm not stopping." General Whitmore gasped. An actual breath, not the desperate half-breaths of someone drowning on dry land. His eyes opened for a fraction of a second. Katie felt his pulse, weak but present. Carotid artery, strong enough to perfuse his brain. His heart rhythm was still erratic, but it was present. The paramedics arrived at 6:19 p.m., sirens clearing the terminal traffic and people scattering like they'd been hit by pressure waves. Two of them she recognized, Rodriguez and Holloway, both of whom Pierce had spent 3 months instructing to keep Katie away from emergency calls. They looked at her with an expression that would have been gratitude if they'd understood what was happening. She handed off the general's vitals, the procedure she performed, the timeline, the medications he would need at Cedar Creek Medical. Pierce was already on his phone. Katie heard fragments while she gave her report. "Yes, I need the airport authority director." His voice was tight. "I have a contractor performing unauthorized procedures on a passenger. I'm going to need external medical review. Yes, I'm also calling the Georgia Nursing Board. She's practicing beyond her scope. Way beyond." He paced while he made the next call. Then the next. A city councilman who owed him favors. The airport operations VP. He was activating a network that had taken him 3 months to build. Every contact who'd accepted his version of Katie's incompetence was about to be called on to confirm it. The paramedics loaded General Whitmore onto the stretcher. His eyes found Katie's for a single moment, and she saw something there, a flicker of recognition, maybe, or understanding. She'd just saved his life. He was going to remember that. She was certain of it. Pierce hung up his phone. His suit was wrinkled from the sprint. His face had gone from catastrophic color to something colder. He pointed at her the way you'd point at something you'd already decided didn't belong. "Badge," he said. "Now." Katie reached for the badge hanging from her neck. The contractor badge that had given her access to Terminal C Medical, that had been her cover identity for 3 months, that was about to become her alibi for nothing. She pulled the laminate off and handed it to him. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. Everything about her composure suggested that she'd been expecting this moment since the day she arrived. "You're done, Rodriguez," Pierce said. Her name in his mouth sounded like sand in a carburetor. "I'm filing for immediate termination and criminal charges." "You hear me? You assaulted a passenger. On hospital grounds." "This is an airport," Katie said. Her voice carried the particular quality of someone correcting a minor detail. "Not hospital grounds." The ambulance doors closed. The sirens began again. She watched the red lights disappear toward Cedar Creek Medical, toward whatever review boards Pierce was already calling, toward whatever came next. She'd accomplished her mission. She'd protected General Whitmore. She'd saved his life. Everything else, the 3 months of psychological demolition, the false termination notices, the destroyed relationships with the paramedics, all of it had been worth this moment. She knew that. What she didn't know was that General James Whitmore would wake up at Cedar Creek Medical and ask for her by name. That a Marine colonel would arrive with her classified personnel file. That the real reckoning was about to begin. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Pierce had just activated a network that extended far beyond airport politics, and every single person he called was about to discover something he never had, that Katie Rodriguez wasn't a contractor desperate for medical work. She was a decorated officer with a silver star and a call sign they'd all recognize if they bothered to look at her file. The question was whether Pierce would realize his mistake before the Pentagon arrived to correct it. The needle went in. Mid-clavicular line. Second intercostal space. Katie's hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this in a sandstorm, in a compound basement, in the dark. The hiss of air escaping, that specific whistle that meant lungs re-inflating, tissue responding, a human body deciding to keep living. General Whitmore's oxygen saturation climbed. 68. 72. 79. She didn't look at his face. She didn't look at the monitors. She looked at the needle depth, the angle, the way his chest began to rise again in something resembling a rhythm. His heart was still fibrillating, irregular, chaotic, a fist clenching and releasing at random, but the pneumothorax was releasing. The pressure in his chest cavity was equalizing. Blood could flow. Oxygen could reach tissue. Derek Pierce burst through the medical station door like he'd been fired from a cannon, his face already the color of spoiled meat, his voice pitched at a register that made 3 travelers stop and stare. "Step away from that passenger. Step away from him now." He was pointing, his hand shaking, and Katie registered the security radio clipped to his belt broadcasting his hysteria to anyone within 6 blocks. Pierce was screaming about assault, about violation of protocol, about a contractor practicing medicine without a license, words that bounced off her like rain on combat armor because the only voice that mattered right now was the one coming from Whitmore's chest, that barely there flutter that was trying very hard to become a heartbeat. Paramedics were 2 minutes out. She knew this because her phone had buzzed 60 seconds ago with the ETA, because muscle memory included mental arithmetic about blood loss and shock and the precise window during which a human heart could be persuaded to remember its job. She administered epinephrine, 1 milligram, for push, the drug moving through Whitmore's vein like a small electric storm, and his monitor erupted into something almost resembling sinus rhythm. Almost. Not quite. Close enough. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was happening 3 feet to her left, where Derek Pierce had his phone pressed to his ear, and he was already making calls. Katie heard the fragments between her own focused breathing. "Airport Authority Director, it's Derek Pierce." "Yes, the medical station." "No, I cannot wait until tomorrow." Pause. "I have a contractor assaulting a passenger in Terminal C. She needs to be removed immediately. Her credentials need to be flagged with the state board." Another pause. His voice took on a different tone, slicker, more practiced. "Yes, I understand you're busy. This will take 20 seconds. The contractor's name is Rodriguez. She's falsifying her nursing certifications." "Yes, I have documentation." "No, she hasn't actually hurt the passenger yet, but she's performing medical procedures she's not qualified to perform, and I need this on record." He hung up and dialed again. Katie's hands were steady. Hands that had held lives together in an aid station with walls made of sandbags and plywood, hands that had performed an emergency thoracotomy in an open courtyard while mortars fell like rain. Derek Pierce's phone calls were the sound of someone trying to pull down a building with a spoon. She was still monitoring Whitmore's oxygen saturation, 85, climbing, when Pierce finished his 3rd call, this one to someone at the Georgia Nursing Board, his voice turning oleaginous, filled with false concern. "Yes, I'm calling to report a credentialing issue. A medical contractor at Hartsfield-Jackson has been providing emergency care without proper licensing. I'm concerned for patient safety." "Yes, I'll hold." The paramedics arrived. 2 of them, both of whom Katie had trained with over the past 3 months, both of whom had been carefully told by Pierce that she was unreliable and prone to overstepping. They looked at the decompression needle, at Whitmore's rising oxygen saturation, at the cardiac monitor showing something that was almost becoming a coherent rhythm. The older paramedic, Patterson, 12 years on the job, met her eyes for a fraction of a second and nodded. "Just barely. Just enough." They loaded the stretcher. Katie handed off report in the clipped, precise language of medical handoff. 78-year-old male, witnessed cardiac arrest, no prior cardiac history, immediate needle decompression for tension pneumothorax, O2 sat recovered from 68 to 87, currently in atrial fibrillation, 1 mg epi 4, 200 joules defibrillation attempted twice, no response yet, patient is viable, transport to Cedar Creek Memorial ICU. She was still speaking when Derek Pierce stepped directly into her path and held up his hand like a traffic cop. His face had gone from red to a shade of purple that suggested his blood pressure was approaching levels that would require emergency intervention. "Your badge," he said. His voice had become quiet. That was worse than the shouting. "Give me your badge." Right now. Katie unpinned the contractor badge from her polo shirt. The badge that had taken her 3 weeks of cover preparation to acquire, 3 months of meticulous work to maintain. The badge that had positioned her exactly where she needed to be when General James Whitmore, a Marine general who had mentored her son Marcus through his first deployment, a general who was apparently interested enough in covert operations to have the Pentagon send her to watch him, decided to have a cardiac event 30 feet from her station. She handed it to him. "Your employee status is terminated, effective immediately," Pierce said, and Katie could hear the triumphant vibration in his voice, could see the way his pupils had dilated, the way his mouth had taken on the slight curve of someone who believed they had just won a war. "I'm forwarding my documentation to the State Board and to airport security. You won't work as a medical professional in Georgia again. You'll be lucky if you can work as a phlebotomist in Mississippi." He turned to the security guard who had followed him in. "Escort her off airport property. Now." Katie picked up her jacket from the back of the chair and allowed herself to be escorted. She didn't look back. She didn't acknowledge Pierce. She walked through Terminal C like someone who was simply clocking out from a job, which, technically speaking, was exactly what was happening. The security guard walked beside her, radioing ahead to the exits. It was 7:13 p.m. The sun was still up, but only barely, and the light had taken on that particular shade of gold that made everything look like it had already happened in the past. Her phone rang at 8:15 p.m. while she was sitting in her car in the short-term parking garage. The voice on the other end was her DIA handler, a woman named Torres who had briefed her on Whitmore's assignment exactly 14 days ago, who had given her the rules and the mission parameters and the absolute prohibition against any action that would compromise her cover. "Rodriguez, your cover is burned." Pierce filed complaints with state authorities and federal agencies. He's claiming you impersonated medical personnel, practiced medicine without a license, and assaulted a passenger. The airport has documentation. He's been building a file. Torres's voice was the precise blend of professional and furious that suggested several people at the Pentagon were already having very uncomfortable conversations. "Whitmore's been transferred to Cedar Creek Memorial ICU. He's stable. But your assignment is terminated. You're ordered to stand down. Do not approach the hospital. Do not contact Whitmore. Do not make any statements to law enforcement. We'll handle Pierce. You go dark." Katie sat in the silence of her parked car. She looked at the jacket folded on the passenger seat, at the lining where the faded Bagram patch was sewn, the insignia of the unit where she had learned that power wasn't a title. Power was the ability to help. Power was knowing exactly what to do when everything was falling apart. Power was the willingness to break your own rules when someone else's life depended on it. She started her car. At 9:33 p.m., Katie was pushing through the heavy doors of the airport services facility near the cargo terminals, the one with the industrial laundry operation that processed all the medical station uniforms and the flight crew linens. The concrete floor was wet. The air smelled like detergent and steam and the particular exhaustion that comes from working a shift that nobody else wants. She was carrying 3 polo shirts, each one embroidered with Hartsfield-Jackson Medical Services, each one a thread in the cover identity that had taken 3 months to construct and 3 seconds to dismantle. She laid them on the steel counter beside the industrial washers and began folding. First shirt, smooth the sleeves, align the seams, fold lengthwise, fold the collar inward, create a rectangle that fit inside another rectangle. Second shirt, repeat. Her hands moved with the mechanical precision of someone performing a ritual, which was exactly what this was. A ritual of closure. A ritual of stepping out of one skin and preparing to step into another. The fluorescent lights above the washers hummed their particular frequency, and Katie realized she would never hear that sound again and not think of the moment when everything changed. The Velcro name tag on the third shirt came off easily. She peeled it slowly, watching the fibers separate, the adhesive releasing its grip. Cade Rodriguez in white letters on blue backing. Not her real name. Not her real identity. Just a useful fiction that had worked exactly as long as it needed to work. An older woman emerged from the back, one of the night shift laundry workers, someone Katie had seen twice before but never spoken to. She watched Katie fold the third shirt with something like recognition. "You getting let go, honey?" the woman asked. Katie nodded. "Medical station job. Medical station job." The woman moved closer, picked up one of the folded shirts, and refolded it more efficiently. "You do something wrong." "I saved someone's life," Katie said. The woman set the shirt down and looked at her, really looked at her, and Katie saw in her expression the kind of understanding that comes from having worked honest jobs for decades, from knowing the difference between following rules and doing right. "Then you did right," the woman said. "Whoever let you go, they'll realize it later. They always do." Katie placed the 3 shirts beside the industrial washers and turned toward the door. Her phone buzzed. Her DIA handler again. "Rodriguez, don't do anything stupid. Whitmore is stable. Pierce is being monitored. Let federal authorities handle this." But Whitmore was stable because Katie had performed needle decompression at the second intercostal space, midclavicular line. Whitmore was stable because she had calculated the drug dosage in her head while her hands were moving and her eyes were watching oxygen saturation climb. Whitmore was stable because she had chosen action over protocol, and she would make that choice again. At 11:20 p.m., Katie walked into Cedar Creek Medical's ICU waiting room. The lighting was that particular shade of institutional bright that made everyone look slightly translucent. Derek Pierce was standing near the reception desk with a hospital security guard, positioned like someone blocking a doorway, his arms crossed, his expression anticipatory. He was waiting for her. He knew she would come. He smiled when he saw her. It was a smile like a predator recognizing weakness, and it was the mistake that would end his career. Grady Memorial's ICU waiting room smells like stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Katie pushes through the double doors at 11:48 p.m., still wearing the jacket she peeled off at the airport 6 hours ago, the faded Bagram patch still sewn inside the lining where Pierce will never see it. Her son Marcus should be asleep in her apartment right now. Instead, she's here. Against orders. Against protocol. Against every instruction her DIA handler gave her when he said, "Your cover is burned. Go home. We'll handle the rest." She didn't go home. The waiting room is dim, lit by the pale glow of a television nobody's watching. Derek Pierce sits in the corner chair like a vulture. He wears his airport manager uniform, pressed navy polo, the insignia catching the fluorescent light. Next to him stands a security guard. Both of them look up when Katie enters. Pierce smiles. It's a smile like a predator recognizing weakness, and it's the mistake that would end his career. He doesn't know this yet. But he should have. "Ms. Rodriguez." Pierce stands, blocking her path to the ICU doors. His voice is smooth, controlled, the voice of a man who has never failed at anything. "I'm afraid General Whitmore isn't accepting visitors. I've instructed hospital security." "Step back, Mr. Pierce." Katie's voice doesn't rise. Doesn't waver. Drops an octave lower than it did 6 hours ago when she was folding uniforms and pretending to be nobody. The security guard looks between them. Uncertain. "I have authority here, and you have." Pierce reaches for her arm. The doors to the ICU swing open. A nurse in teal scrubs appears, then steps aside. Behind her comes a Marine colonel in dress blues, service ribbons stacked in neat rows across his chest like medals earned in wars Pierce's generation only read about. The colonel looks at Katie. Then at Pierce's hand still extended toward her arm. Pierce's hand drops. "Captain Rodriguez." The colonel's voice carries the weight of command. Not a question. An acknowledgement. "General Whitmore is asking for you." The words land like artillery fire in a confined space. Pierce's face goes the color of old bone. Katie walks past him without looking down. The colonel escorts her through the ICU doors. Behind them, she hears Pierce's voice crack, "What do you mean, Captain?" The colonel closes the doors. General Whitmore's room is in the ICU cardiac section. The machines around his bed beep in steady rhythm: heart monitor, oxygen saturation tracker, blood pressure cuff cycling every 15 minutes. He's awake. His eyes open when Katie enters, and they track her with the clarity of a man who spent 40 years making split-second decisions in rooms where hesitation costs lives. The colonel steps back, gives them space, positions himself at the door. Reaper 6. Whitmore's voice is raspy from the intubation, but the words are sharp. His eyes drop from her face to the jacket slung over her arm. The lining is visible. The patch is visible. The faded insignia of the Bagram Combat Hospital, where Katie spent 3 years doing surgeries in a tent under mortar fire, where she learned that protocol means nothing when a soldier is bleeding out in front of you. "Sir," Katie says. Just that. Just his rank and her acknowledgement, and everything else suspended between them. The colonel steps forward and opens a manila folder. His reading voice is formal, official, the kind of voice that gets recorded for court-martial proceedings. Captain Catherine Elizabeth Rodriguez. Combat Surgical Nurse, Bagram Airfield, 2017 to 2020. 37 lives saved in direct theater operations. Silver Star for extracting 6 wounded personnel under direct small arms fire during the 2019 compound breach, Loga Province. Recommended for promotion to Major by General Whitmore himself. Each sentence hangs in the room like a separate weight. Katie doesn't move. Doesn't blink. Whitmore's eyes are on her, tracking her composure, and she knows what he sees: a woman who has held people together while they were falling apart. A woman who's already survived worse than Derek Pierce could ever dream of. The door opens again. A brigadier general enters. His uniform is immaculate. His face is made of granite. He doesn't introduce himself because he doesn't need to. His rank speaks first, and everything else comes second. She's currently assigned to Defense Intelligence Agency Operational Security, the brigadier says, cutting off the sound of Pierce's voice outside the door, still demanding answers about what Katie supposedly is. Detailed to monitor General Whitmore's financial irregularities as part of a security clearance review. That assignment is classified. That operation is classified. And that badge you tried to destroy her with, Mr. Pierce, is classified. A Navy vet IT administrator named Connor Hayes is standing in the hallway now. Katie can see him through the small window in the door. He's younger than Pierce expected, maybe 30, with a kind of careful posture that comes from spending 4 years on a fast attack submarine where you learn to move like ghosts through narrow spaces. At 7:52 p.m. tonight, a Pentagon investigator says she appeared while Katie was in the hallway, document in hand, laptop already open. Someone using your credentials accessed the Terminal C security server and attempted to delete 18 minutes of footage. That footage shows Captain Rodriguez performing needle decompression for tension pneumothorax. Textbook execution. Combat-level procedure. You intended to use the absence of that footage to support your fabricated complaint. Pierce's mouth opens. No sound comes out. Fortunately, the investigator continues. Petty Officer Hayes recognized what was happening. He preserved every frame and reported the tampering to federal authorities. Deleting evidence related to a DIA operation is a felony offense under the Espionage Act of 1917. The brigadier steps closer to Pierce. His shadow fills the doorway. You filed false complaints with the Georgia Nursing Board. You contacted a city councilman to pressure airport administration. You attempted to interfere with a federal security review. You activated your entire network to destroy a captain's cover and her career. The brigadier pauses. You were protecting your ego, not your protocols. Pierce's eyes are wide now. The color is gone from his face. He looks like a man who suddenly understands that the ground beneath him has been collapsing for hours and he's only now feeling the fall. Katie's voice comes from inside the ICU room. Cold. Measured. The voice of someone who has given orders in operating theaters and seen soldiers choose to follow those orders because they knew she'd been where they were. You thought competence without credentials meant nothing. You thought respect without status was fraud. You were wrong about all of it. Whitmore speaks from the bed, stronger now, pushing himself up against the pillows despite the fall lines and the cardiac monitoring leads. This woman saved my life with a procedure most ER doctors would hesitate to perform. You tried to punish her for being better than you. Pierce leaves the room. His shoulders are hunched. His hands are shaking. He takes the ICU stairs instead of the elevator, moving like a man walking through water, moving like someone who's finally understood the weight of the mistake he made. The brigadier hands Katie a new folder as the sun rises over Atlanta. Wrong kind of sunrise for this kind of morning, too bright, too clean for the wreckage of a man's career. Your cover is burned. Your mission is complete. General Whitmore's financial irregularities were him setting up a scholarship fund for Gold Star families. He was embarrassed to make it public. He's cleared. You're being reassigned, Major. The brigadier's voice lands on the rank and lets it stay there. Your choice where? 6 months later. The Atlanta VA Hospital's 3rd floor, Clinical Services Wing. Katie's office door reads, Major Katie Rodriguez, Clinical Director, Emergency Medicine. The promotion came through exactly like it was supposed to. Inside, her desk holds a photo of Marcus in dress blues, standing at ease in front of a Navy recruiting poster, and beside it, a framed silver star in a glass case. The faded Bagram patch is mounted in a shadow box on the wall behind her chair, visible to anyone who enters, no longer hidden, no longer pretending. She's reviewing staffing schedules for the ER rotation when she hears a cartwheel past her open door. The squeak of medical supply wheels on polished tile. Katie glances up. Derek Pierce is pushing a catheter cart, delivering supplies to the nurse's station. He wears a delivery company polo now. His name tag reads Equipment Services. He doesn't make eye contact when he passes her office. He doesn't speak. He wheels the cart forward like a man who's learned the cost of attention, like someone who understands that some rooms are above his clearance level now and always will be. Katie watches him for 3 seconds. Then she returns to her work. She doesn't acknowledge him. Doesn't nod or wave or give him the satisfaction of being seen. She simply turns her attention back to the next shift schedule and lets him become invisible, which is exactly what he deserves. An hour later, a Marine lieutenant knocks on her door frame. Marcus grins, his mother's composure with his father's jaw. Mom, General Whitmore's downstairs dedicating the new cardiac unit. He asked if you'd come down for the ceremony. They walk together to the hospital's main auditorium. Whitmore sees her, breaks from his conversation with the hospital administrator, and crosses the room with the careful gait of a man whose chest is still healing but whose pride is intact. He shakes her hand firmly. Major Rodriguez. I owe you my life. More than that, I owe you the chance to watch my granddaughter graduate high school next month. To be there. His voice cracks slightly. To be there for the things that matter. You don't owe me anything, sir, Katie says. I was doing my job. You were doing more than that, Whitmore says. You were proving something a man like Pierce will never understand. That evening, Katie returns to her office and finds a package on her desk. Inside, a new unit patch from the DIA Operational Security Division, still crisp, still official, and a handwritten note from the brigadier in ink that looks like it was written with a fountain pen that's been carried through 3 wars. The note reads, Power is not a title. Power is the ability to help. Katie pins the patch beside the Bagram insignia in the shadow box. Through her window, she sees Pierce loading his delivery van in the parking lot below. Boxes of medical supplies. Catheter kits. For bags. The inventory of hospitals and urgent cares that will never know his name or his story or the mistake he made when he decided that status mattered more than competence. He climbs into the driver's seat and pulls away. The van disappears into Atlanta traffic. Katie turns off her office light and locks the door. She walks out into the evening, the real evening now, not the fluorescent-lit simulation of the hospital hallways. Outside, the city is cool and moving. Rain begins to fall, light at first, then harder, and she doesn't run from it. She walks through it like someone who's learned that some things are worth getting wet for. The legend walks home. If you found Katie's journey inspiring, please subscribe for more stories of hidden strength and quiet courage. Like this video and comment. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value? Share your story. We'll be here to listen.